After providing an overview of factor analysis, we'll get into creating a multi-item scale, factor analysis itself, reliability, and then exploratory and confirmatory factor analysis. From Alan Perlis, we have two quotes. "Fools ignore complexity. Pragmatists suffer it. Some can avoid it, but geniuses remove it." And then, "Simplicity does not precede complexity, but follows it." Both of these convey the issue that is at the heart of factor analysis. The world can be really complex in terms of the number of different items that are out there, but in the mind of the consumer, it usually boils down to a limited number of dimensions. At its core, factor analysis is a data reduction technique designed to represent a wide range of attributes on a smaller number of dimensions. For example, consider the attributes of a car such as speed, sleekness, power, exciting, practical, good storage, useful, reliable, low maintenance, and fuel efficient. It's possible that all of these attributes might only be represented on three different underlying dimensions in the mind of the consumer: sportiness, utilitarian, and economical. For example, consider all of the different items associated with a bank. There are a lot of elements, but in the mind of the customer, these probably break down into service, convenience, and cost. Work with me here because this might seem a little weird, but imagine the following animals moving under a large sheet, assuming that the turtle and the snail were big enough to be seen. How many animals would you perceive to be present under the sheet? Now we have the sheet in place. If you think of the elephant, there may be a number of different points: its head, tail, ears, back, and they all vary somewhat in relationship to each other from one point in time to another, but they're all clearly part of the same animal. You don't see the bumps for the head, tail, ears, and back and declare that you think that there are 4 animals when they all really belong to the same elephant. The same could be said about the points associated with the turtle and the snail. There would appear to be 3 distinct lumps, each one having a number of parts that seem to be moving in unison, certainly closely enough that you would think that they belonged together. Sometimes in marketing research, you ask a series of very similar questions to find out a specific opinion or attitude. These are referred to as multi-item scales. This way, when you ask multiple questions, you can be more confident that the response was not just random, on the low side, or on the high side. The downside, of course, in asking more questions is that there are more items to put in the survey. So imagine that you watch an advertisement and then you're asked the following. Evaluate the extent to which the ad makes you feel happy, sad, joyful, unhappy, distressed, bad, and good. How many general types of emotions do you think are represented here? One would expect that happy, joyful, and good will receive similar evaluations, and these are positive emotions. And one would also expect that sad, unhappy, distressed, and bad will receive similar evaluations relative to each other, and these are negative emotions. In being able to combine these, we reduce a complex world with 7 emotions down to a more simple version with 2 general types. Over the next couple of slides, I'm going to go through some terminology with a view to applying it a short while thereafter. Bear with me, though, as we go through some of these terms that might seem a little foreign at first. When we conduct factor analysis, we have to select which type of rotation we'll use. There are 2 types. The first is an orthogonal rotation. Orthogonal is simply a complex word for uncorrelated. This tends to be the most common and is the easiest to interpret as the variables tend to be clearly associated with one construct. The most frequently seen type of orthogonal rotation is Varimax, but others include Quartimax and Equimax. The other type of rotation is oblique rotation. With oblique rotation, the requirement that the constructs be orthogonal is relaxed, and we can allow the constructs to be correlated, just like in real life. The most common type of oblique rotation is Promax. Others include ortho-oblique and direct Oblimin. Factor analysis can be exploratory in nature. In these situations, we throw a bunch of variables in and see how many factors there seem to be, and which variables load high on each of the factors. A good example of this in the course is example J. Factor analysis can also be confirmatory in nature. Here we might have a series of scale items that we believe should be grouped together and belong to a single construct. The factor analysis would be used to confirm this belief. For further elucidation and enlightenment regarding confirmatory factor analysis, one can refer to example K. As implied by the names, exploratory factor analysis tends to happen more at earlier stages of the research process, whereas confirmatory factor analysis is used to simply reaffirm that the scale you've developed still holds true. So, just to drive this home, in the case of confirmatory factor analysis, maybe I have already done a bunch of work on emotions, and I just run a single factor analysis to confirm that happy, joyful, and good all belong to my positive emotion scale. In this course, there are videos for each of the different statistical examples. Normally, I let these stand alone from the lecture material. However, in this case, I'm going to go through one of the examples, and it should help to make things clear. We're going to use example J based on the exercise survey. In this, individuals were asked to indicate the impact of different motivational factors, ranging from "I exercise so I'll live longer" through to "exercise is important for my mental health." There are 3 steps we'll employ. In the first step, we use factor analysis to determine the appropriate factor structure. In other words, how many factors there are and how many items load on each one. In the graphic here, there are 3 factors. Sometimes there are more, sometimes there are less. Of course, we have to do the factor analysis to figure out how many factors there really are. The mechanics of conducting the factor analysis in SPSS are included in additional slides as well as the supplementary video. I'm going to jump straight to the output. In this case, we can see that there are 3 components with eigenvalues over 1. 1 is really the critical number to say there is a whole animal there. So in this case, we have 3 whole animals. With Varimax rotation, we look at the rotated component matrix, noted at the top of the table there. And for each item, M1 through M10, we look to see which component it has the highest absolute value on. So we can see that M3, M7, M9, and M10 belong to component 1. M1, M2, M4, and M6 belong to factor 2. Finally, M5 and M8 belong to factor 3. Running this again, using Promax rotation, we look at the pattern matrix as noted at the top of the table. We see that the results are the same as for the Varimax rotation. This is good as it indicates the same factor structure. In practice, I almost always see the same structure using Varimax and Promax. So we find that there are 3 animals. The factor analysis reveals 3 constructs or factors to be present. There are no negatively loading variables, so we don't need to reverse code. Let's suppose, though, that we had 2 variables, I love dogs and I hate dogs. You would expect that if a person provided a high rating to I love dogs, that they would provide a low rating for I hate dogs, and vice versa. So you could think of these as belonging to the same scale, but the second would be negatively associated with the first. In a situation like this, we go in and reverse code. So what was a 1 becomes a 5, what was a 2 becomes a 4, and so forth. We do this so we convert things to the same overall meaning. So a high score represents liking a dog, and a low score represents not liking a dog. What I'm trying to get at is that you have to make sure that all of your scale items are moving in the same direction when you put them into a composite scale. So at this stage, knowing that we have 3 animals, we would redo the factor analysis 3 more times. one for the first factor, M3, M7, M9, and M10, another for the second factor using M1, M2, M4, and M6, and again for the third factor using M5 and M8. So this takes us to the second step, repeating the factor analysis for each construct, only using those items that belong to the factor identified. This will mean more shortly, but each factor should load only on a single construct. In other words, there should only be one factor with an eigenvalue of 1 or greater. So we redo the factor analysis for the first construct using M3, M7, M9, and M10. And as anticipated, only one component or factor with an eigenvalue above 1 exists. They all belong to the same animal. We then redo the factor analysis for the second construct using M1, M2, M4, and M6. And again, we find only one factor. Finally, we do the factor analysis for the third construct using M5 and M8. Here as well, we see only one factor with an eigenvalue greater than 1. At some point, we need to name these factors. How would you describe each of these groupings? I might label the first enjoyment, and the second vitality, and the third social. This is somewhat subjective, but I think these terms represent the groupings well. Eventually, we can develop overall scores for each of these variables, but first, back to reliability. In the third step, we conduct reliability analysis for each of the factors. Forgive me if it seems like I'm overly fascinated with dogs, but here is an example of a dog lover scale. In such a scale, multiple questions regarding the same construct are presented in order to increase the stability of the response. But the questions often look very similar. So these might be, do you like dogs? Are dogs good? And are dogs nice to have as pets? So with this dog lover scale, how do you know that all of the questions should be part of the same multi-item scale? Well, first, you run a factor analysis to see if they all relate to the same construct. In other words, do they all belong to the same animal? Second, perform a reliability analysis to see how much these items covary and whether one or more of the questions should be dropped from the scale. Perhaps an item relates to the construct, but really not that well. For example, with do you like dogs, are dogs good, and are dogs nice to have as pets, the last question might have more to do with actually owning a dog, not just liking them. Sometimes factor analysis indicates a certain number of constructs, and by default it has to assign each variable to a particular construct. Sometimes, though, a variable does not really fit in well with the others. As an example, suppose that we have people from Europe and Asia and that we sort them into cultural groups. Which group would a person from South America belong to? In the visual here, all of the items might be considered apples, but one of them might be somewhat different than the others. Extending this further, sometimes one or more variables associated with a factor is really not that representative of the factor. Consider this hypothetical sports fan scale. I like football, I like baseball, I like soccer, and I like fun things. The first three are fairly representative of this scale, but the one regarding fun things is probably a poor fit overall. As a consequence, you might want to drop this one from the scale. With reliability analysis, the critical number we'll look at is Cronbach's alpha, and the higher, the better. Typically, we want to get above 0.7 for the scale. Again, the mechanics of running the reliability analysis are left to the supplemental slides and videos. I'll just jump to the output here. In this case, for the scale pertaining to enjoyment, we have a Cronbach's alpha of 0.877, which is really solid. Moreover, we can see that if we drop one of the variables, as indicated in that far right column, the Cronbach's alpha does not really get any higher. In reference to the reliability analysis for the enjoyment scale, the Cronbach's alpha was 0.877, which would be bordering on excellent. We could run the reliability analysis for the second factor, the one we referred to as vitality. Here we see that the Cronbach's alpha of 0.777 is good, but it could be improved if we dropped M1. With a scale value of 0.777, you wouldn't need to drop M1 if you didn't want to, or if you had really good reasons for keeping M1 in there. But in this case, it would simplify the survey and increase the reliability of the scale up to 0.81. So we rerun the analysis without M1, and the alpha goes up to 0.811 as anticipated. But lo and behold, if we drop M6, the alpha will go up to 0.87. So we drop M6 and rerun the analysis. Note that with only two variables, you can't calculate Cronbach's alpha if item deleted. This would be like trying to take a correlation with only one number. Finally, we take a look at the third animal that we called social. The overall value of 0.844 is great, and we would be happy with this. Again, note that because there are only two items in the scale, if you drop one, there's nothing to correlate it with. This is why there is no value for Cronbach's alpha if item deleted. So just to finesse things, we're going to remove all of the items that were not associated with the scale and keep the remaining ones and plug them into a factor analysis. When we do so, we find three animals, and these account for approximately 80% of the variance observed. And we would be very happy with 80%. Given that we know what the animals are now, we can calculate averages for each of the scales. Enjoyment would be equal to M3 plus M7 plus M9 plus M10 divided by 4. Vitality would be M2 plus M4 divided by 2. And social would be equal to M5 plus M8 divided by 2. We can then run the descriptive statistics for each of these variables.